Hey guys! Tonight we're slipping back into 17th century Japan to follow the morning rituals of an Edo-period samurai. You're sleeping on a thin cotton futon over woven straw mats. The air smells faintly of sandalwood, last night's miso, and a touch of cold iron from the sword propped beside your bed. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows. And that's your cue. Time to rise. Now, be warned, you probably won't survive this. You're living in a rigid honor-bound society where misplacing your chopsticks might lead to a lecture from a stern uncle in lacquered armor. There's a strict morning order to everything. And yes, you're going to be very hungry before anyone lets you eat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sky above your compound is still gray when you crack open your eyes. The shoji screen beside your futon glows faintly, just enough light to make out the rough ceiling beams and the bundled cloak where a mouse may or may not have spent the night. You lie still for a moment, half dreaming, until a servant coughs discreetly in the corridor. That's your second cue. You push aside your quilted sleeping cover and stretch in the cold morning air. Tatami mats creak underfoot as you rise. The scent of dried rushes and old wood is earthy, grounding. The room is spare, one futon, one chest, a hanging scroll of calligraphy that's crooked from your cousin sparring too enthusiastically last week. Your sword lies across its rest, hilt gleaming faintly. You glance at it, nod to it, as though it's a fellow sleeper. In a way, it is. You slip on your everyday kimono, underdyed cotton, patched but clean. The deep indigo fades at the seams, but it's warm from where you folded it against your pillow. As a junior samurai, you're not exactly rolling in silk and gold. That's for daimyo. You're practical, stoic, and probably still a bit sore from yesterday's morning drills. Outside your room, the corridor is quiet, just the distant scrape of someone sweeping the walkway. In Edo-period Japan, silence isn't awkward, it's expected. You move with care, feet sliding slightly so you don't stomp like a farmer. You pass a closed door where an elder snores faintly. You bow slightly even though they can't see you. Rituals matter. A hint of wood smoke floats through the corridor, not strong enough to signal cooking, just the banking of last night's fire in the small family brazier. That'll come in handy soon because right now, it's cold. The walls of the compound are made from thin wooden planks and paper screens. If you're lucky, the wind isn't blowing directly through them. As you reach the outer walkway of the compound, you slide the shoji open and step into the crisp dawn. The inner garden is still. Stones glisten with dew. A single pine tree stands crooked in one corner like a bent sentinel. You inhale. The air is clean, sharp, and smells faintly of pine sap and the damp cloth used to wipe the floorboards last night. You glance around, no one else is out yet. That gives you a brief moment to enjoy the silence before someone reminds you that your footfalls are slightly uneven. You walk slowly past the training yard, where wooden swords lean against the wall, waiting. You'll be back here in an hour, sweating and swearing internally while pretending to be the embodiment of serenity. There's a delicate tension in the stillness of morning. Even the birds seem hesitant to chirp too loudly. The Edo period, for all its violence and intrigue, is also deeply meditative in its daily rituals. Every action has weight. Every gesture speaks. You stop near a stone basin under the eaves and kneel briefly. It's time for your first purification, a symbolic rinsing of the hands and mouth. The ladle's bamboo handle is wet with dew. You lift it, pour cold water over your fingers, and gasp a little because yes, it's that cold. You swish water into your mouth, then spit discreetly into the garden's edge. Historians still argue whether samurai truly observed these rituals daily, or whether this level of detail crept in more during the peaceful Tokugawa era, as warriors became administrators with poetic side hustles. But hey, either way, it's part of your life now. You rise, drying your hands on your sleeve gently, of course. Samurai aren't supposed to look disheveled. Not even at dawn. You bow toward the little family shrine, tucked in an alcove by the kitchen, where a faint stick of incense burns. It smells like cedar and dried plum skin. Here's a weird detail. Some samurai believed that certain days of the calendar were unlucky to eat rice. So instead, they'd start the day with millet or even a kind of root gruel. You're hoping this isn't one of those days, because let's be honest, root gruel tastes like punishment. You head back inside as the compound begins to wake. Doors slide open. Soft murmurs pass between family members. A child squeals and is immediately shushed. Somewhere, someone drops a wooden bucket. It clatters just long enough for everyone to silently judge them. Your stomach growls softly, but you ignore it. Breakfast is still a few steps away, several of them literal and all of them ceremonial. For now, it's enough to feel the texture of the day beginning, the layers of custom and cold air wrapping around your body like a second robe. You step back into your room, fold your hands neatly, and wait. The day hasn't officially begun, but you're awake, alert, and deeply regretting not sneaking a plum bun last night. You sit quietly, knees folded beneath you, trying not to think about how much your legs already ache. Seiza, the formal kneeling posture, is less about comfort and more about signaling respect and discipline. To outsiders, it may look elegant. To your calves? Torture. Your toes tingle and your hips mutter curses, but you remain still. After all, this is how a samurai shows readiness. Even before breakfast, a quiet knock at your sliding door, then the faint swish of fabric. Your servant enters, middle-aged, face blank with practiced deference, but you've known him since you were a baby chewing on rice crackers. He bows deeply, then sets down a tray. Not breakfast. Not yet. Just a warm towel and a shallow cup of green tea. You nod your thanks. It's a silent exchange, unspoken etiquette that's been drilled into you since childhood. The tea is earthy, grassy, and just bitter enough to snap the last of sleep from your mind. You sip slowly, eyes half closed, inhaling steam that smells faintly of roasted rice. No sugar, no milk, just pure, unadorned focus in a ceramic cup. The towel is warm from resting near the hearth. You press it to your face and neck, inhaling that faint charcoal scent. There's something ancient about this moment, this tiny ritual of cleansing, before the day's responsibilities begin. Mainstream historians agree. Even in peacetime, the samurai class held fast to morning rituals as a way to maintain discipline. After all, when there's no war to fight, you must battle laziness instead. And here's your first strange fact of the day. During the Edo period, some samurai believed that cleansing with hot water could drain away good luck if done at the wrong hour. Hence, a simple towel often replaced full morning baths. Practical, sure, but also just superstitious enough to keep things spicy. You adjust your kimono, smoothing the folds with deliberate care. Every line must lie flat, every collar aligned. Your appearance is a mirror of your spirit. A wrinkled robe suggests a wrinkled soul, or at least an inattentive one. And inattentiveness is dangerous, both on the battlefield and at breakfast. Outside your window, the garden begins to stir. Sparrows hop among the pebbles. A cat, likely belonging to no one but fed by everyone, stretches luxuriously on a sun-warmed stone. The air smells fresher now. The sun has risen just enough to cast pale gold through the wooden slats. Now it's time for sword inspection. Not battle prep, just the quiet routine of checking your katana and wakizashi. You kneel again, yes, more seiza, more tingling limbs, and place the swords in front of you on a folded cloth. Carefully, almost reverently, you slide the katana partway from its scabbard. The steel catches the morning light. Not to show off, just to make sure there's no hint of rust or neglect. The wakizashi follows, its blade shorter but just as sharp. This is your companion indoors, the one that rarely leaves your side. And yes, it's also the traditional weapon used in seppuku, but we're not going to think about that while your stomach is still empty. Scholars still debate how often samurai actually performed these morning sword checks. Some argue it was more ceremonial than practical, especially during peacetime when swords were rarely drawn. Others believe the daily inspection became a sort of meditative exercise, an extension of the samurai's spiritual bond with his weapon. Either way, you've done it enough times that your hands move with muscle memory, not thought. Satisfied, you polish the blades gently with a silk cloth, return them to their scabbards, and place them beside your seat. not on your belt yet. You're not leaving the compound this morning. But still, they stay close. Always. You hear soft footsteps and the creak of wooden trays being carried down the corridor. Breakfast is approaching. You can smell it now. Miso soup with a whisper of dried bonito, rice steamed over charcoal, and something pickled, radish most likely. Not extravagant, but nourishing. And the rice, oh the rice. Polished, short grain, sticky enough to clump just right between your chopsticks. Your servant returns, this time with a larger tray. He bows and sets it before you. You bow in return, nothing too deep, just enough to show acknowledgement. The tray is lacquered, the bowl ceramic with delicate blue glaze. You take a moment to appreciate the layout. Rice bowl on the left, miso soup on the right, pickles top center, and a small square of grilled mackerel nestled beside a sliver of tamagoyaki, sweet rolled omelet. You pick up your chopsticks, bow your head slightly, and murmur the words, "Ita de kamasu," a phrase that means, "I humbly receive." But also, I recognize the work that went into this, from the farmer to the cook to the firewood gatherer. Gratitude in every bite. You eat slowly, deliberately, no talking, no multitasking. Breakfast is not rushed in your house. It's a time for grounding. The rice is perfect, soft but not mushy. The miso soup is hot, layered with umami, and the fish, slightly charred, salty, and just oily enough to melt in your mouth. The pickled radish delivers a jolt of tang that wakes your tongue like a splash of cold water. Odd detail for you. In some samurai households, children were taught to eat rice one grain at a time to instill patience and discipline. You're not that extreme, but you do catch yourself counting grains occasionally, just to test your willpower. As you chew, you listen. The rustle of fabric. The clink of dishes. A crow caws overhead like it's offended by your peaceful morning. Somewhere in the next room, someone sneezes and then immediately tries to pretend they didn't. You smile softly to yourself. This is your rhythm, your ritual, a breakfast shaped not just by hunger but by heritage. You eat everything, leaving even a single grain of rice would be disrespectful. When you're done, you place your chopsticks across the top of your bowl, parallel and neat, and bow again. Goka susuma deshita. Thank you for the feast. Your servant reappears to collect the tray. No words are exchanged. They're not needed. There's a mutual understanding here, old as stone lanterns and tatami mats. Your stomach is full, your limbs warm, and the day has begun. A low bell rings in the outer corridor, a soft, resonant chime that signals the daily readings have begun. You shift your weight and rise slowly, brushing stray grains of rice from your kimono sleeve. Your knees complain, but they've learned not to protest too loudly. Morning duties wait for no one. You pad down the corridor in soft split-toe tabi socks, your footsteps silent against the polished wooden floors. Paper doors slide open with that familiar HHK, and the household begins to hum gently to life. You're not in a castle, not some high-ranking daimyo with an army of retainers. You're middle-tier samurai, respected, comfortable, but always one mistake away from disgrace. Or worse, from poverty. And here's something most people don't realize. A huge number of Edo-period samurai were effectively bureaucrats. City-bound, paperwork-burdened, rule-obsessed functionaries. Not warriors on horseback, but men of ink. Not blood. Historians still argue whether this bureaucratic drift dulled the samurai spirit, or merely refined it into something more cerebral. Still, your morning isn't ruled by ledgers yet. First comes recitation. You slide into the tatami room where your father, retired, stern, and unyieldingly alert, sits cross-legged, flanked by two younger cousins. A scroll has already been unrolled. The air smells faintly of ink and aged paper, dusted with sandalwood from the corner incense. Today's reading is from the Analects of Confucius. No surprise there. The teachings are etched into your childhood memories like grooves in an old woodblock print. You take your place beside your cousin and begin to read aloud, voice low and steady. When we see men of worth, we should think of equaling them. When we see men of a contrary character, we should examine ourselves. The words tumble into the quiet morning, half prayer, half mirror. You're not just repeating them. You're trying to wear them like armor, thin, philosophical armor that doesn't stop arrows but might slow down arrogance. This daily reading serves two purposes. 1, to keep your mind sharp. 2, to remind everyone, including yourself, that being samurai isn't just about swinging swords. It's about living with integrity. Or at least appearing to. Halfway through the passage, your cousin stumbles on a phrase, then quickly corrects himself. Your father doesn't flinch. He just exhales through his nose in the ancient Japanese sign for, I am disappointed but too dignified to say so aloud. You resist the urge to smirk. Here's a quirky detail you might enjoy. In many samurai households, children practice their calligraphy by copying Confucian quotes onto dried bamboo slips before they graduated to paper. Cheaper, reusable, and delightfully splinter-prone. Nothing like a bamboo splinter under your fingernail to remind you that virtue comes at a price. Once the readings end, your father nods, his subtle benediction, and you're dismissed. Not with words, just a flicker of eye contact, a twitch of one salt and pepper eyebrow. You bow, of course, and back out of the room like a ninja retreating from an awkward conversation. The hall outside is brighter now, morning fully in bloom. You step into the courtyard, where the stone path glistens faintly with dew. A breeze rustles the slender leaves of the maple tree, and somewhere above, a dove coos lazily, like it's still trying to wake up. Time for hygiene. Not a full bath, not yet, those are usually evening affairs, but a quick wash in the stone basin near the kitchen wall. You roll up your sleeves and splash cold water onto your face and hands, the sting waking up your skin faster than any tea. The basin itself is beautifully plain, gray stone smoothed by generations of use, with a tiny bamboo spout that drips like a clock with no hands. Water dribbles down your chin and neck as you dry off on a square of linen. You glance into the polished bronze mirror mounted beside the basin. Not for vanity, well, not only for vanity, but to make sure your top knot hasn't gone rogue. It hasn't, but it's always worth checking. A sloppy chanmage is social suicide. Here's something people rarely mention. The daily maintenance of a samurai's hair could take hours. Wax, string, combs made of boxwood, and a small army of hairdressers if you were high-ranking enough. You manage it yourself. 1 comb, 2 pins, 3 quiet curses when the wax gets in your eye. You return inside just as your wife appears in the corridor, her sleeves drawn up as she finishes tying a cloth around her head. She gives you a respectful nod, not a smile, and you return the gesture. Morning greetings between spouses can be brief, but layered with meaning, like saying, I see you, I honor you, and no, I won't mention that time you burned the rice last week. She heads toward the kitchen garden. You pause, watching her slip into her wooden get-a-sandals and disappear into the morning. She's likely going to check on the daikon or pick herbs for tonight's dinner. No one ever says it aloud, but the household runs on her quiet labor. And now, back to the house, where your mother sits near the family altar, hands folded, eyes closed. She murmurs a prayer to the ancestors, incense smoke curling around her like a silk scarf. You bow as you pass, the scent of sandalwood wrapping around your senses. It's calming, familiar, and a tiny bit sneeze-inducing. In many samurai homes, ancestor veneration was a cornerstone of daily life. Not just candles and prayers, but actual food offerings. Rice, sake, sometimes a sliver of dried fish if the family was feeling fancy. There's still some scholarly debate over how much of this was heartfelt belief and how much was ritual habit, like leaving cookies out for gods you're not totally sure are hungry. You glance at the offerings, tiny bowls arranged with care, a stick of incense burning down in silence. You catch your reflection again in the black lacquer of the altar stand. You look taller than you feel, more composed than you are. That's something, at least. And then, somewhere deep in the house, a child shrieks with laughter. Someone else drops a tray. A dog barks. Life intrudes on ritual. The house breathes. Your duties await. You make your way toward the genkan, the sun now climbing with a confident, amber warmth. The entryway is as you left it, polished, spare. A single dried chrysanthemum tucked into a bamboo vase. You kneel to adjust your sandals, pausing a moment to enjoy the faint smell of straw mats mingled with cedar wood and the dusting of ash from the brazier. Outside, a servant scurries past with a covered basket, nodding briefly before disappearing around the corner toward the market. You pull on your outer kimono, its deep indigo folds still creased from where it hung overnight. The mon, your family crest, is neatly stitched at the back, a delicate white emblem of a hawk feather. You smooth it without thinking. Appearances matter even more than you'd like to admit. In the distance, the town is beginning to awaken. The streets, usually serene in the pre-dawn hush, now thrum with quiet energy. Merchants unbolt wooden shutters, dogs sniff curiously at the corners of food stalls, and apprentices jog in twos, still bleary-eyed from whatever trouble they got into last night. You, however, have a very different destination, the small armory space behind the main hall. Now, don't get too excited. You're not heading there to suit up for battle. You're there to check your weapons, yes, but mostly as a daily act of reverence. The katana, especially during the Edo period, had become more symbol than tool, a visual declaration of class and discipline. That doesn't mean you'd want to drop yours on your toe, of course. The room smells of oil and old leather. You kneel before the sword stand, where your daisho set rests, a matched katana and wakizashi. You slide the katana free just a few inches, enough to catch the morning light along the hamon, the temper line that dances like a wave. You've polished this blade 100 times, and yet, each glance feels new, like it's watching you right back. There's a soft tap at the door. You recognize the rhythm, your younger brother. He enters with 2 cloth bundles. Inside, breakfast supplies. It's here, in the quiet shared space of weaponry and rice, that your family tends to eat its morning meal, not in the bustling kitchen, but in this tucked-away room of discipline and steel. It's oddly peaceful, a reminder, perhaps, that even warriors need their carbs. Your brother lays out the food with practiced ease. Bowls of white rice, lightly salted pickled plums, a small dish of natto, you wrinkle your nose at that one, and a warm flask of miso soup with floating green onions. There's grilled river fish, still crackling faintly from the coals, and a square of tamagoyaki, the sweet rolled egg that always reminds you of New Year's breakfasts. A quick historical note. Breakfast for Edo-period samurai was modest but thoughtful. Nutritionally balanced, relatively small, and carefully prepared, especially in homes like yours, where discipline was the unspoken seasoning in every dish. You eat in near silence, punctuated only by the clink of chopsticks and the occasional murmur of appreciation. Your brother gestures at the tamagoyaki. You nod. He doesn't smile, but you can tell he's smug. He made it himself. Here's a fun little side note. Some families added a teaspoon of sake to the morning egg to give it a bit more depth and fluff. Historians still argue whether that counts as starting the day with alcohol, or just creative seasoning. Either way, you're not complaining. Halfway through your rice, your brother clears his throat. Oh, that sound usually precedes one of 3 things: a favor, a confession, or a request to borrow money. Would you mind taking my place at the magistrate's visit today? He asks, eyes fixed very deliberately on his soup. Bingo. You exhale slowly. The visit itself is nothing dramatic, just part of your family's ongoing duties as regional overseers. But the magistrate is known for his ability to turn even casual conversation into a minefield of political nuance. Also, he chews loudly. You consider. Then you nod once. Your brother bows deeply. I owe you. You already did. You mutter, but there's no heat in your voice. The 2 of you finish eating. Your bowls are cleared, washed quickly in the rear kitchen with cold water and a splash of rice bran for scrubbing. No fancy soaps here. Just centuries of good-enough tradition. Now comes a quiet moment before duty calls. You step outside again, sword at your hip, not because you'll use it, but because it belongs there. The streets are alive now, a slow current of sandals and carts and fishmongers yelling about the size of their eels. You pass a group of children playing hanetsuki, a kind of paddle game, not unlike badminton but with zero regard for spatial awareness. One shuttlecock nearly hits you in the face. The child bows so fast they nearly fall over. You nod in return. No need to terrify them. Not before lunch. You stop by the corner stall where a gray-haired woman sells small bundles of charcoal and kindling. Your house has a supply, of course, but she always tucks in a sprig of yuzu peel when you buy from her. It makes the smoke smell faintly of citrus. You trade 2 coins for a bundle and a nod of respect. Then, as you turn back toward your house, you catch sight of something strange. A man in lacquered shoes, loitering by the canal, face hidden beneath an oversized straw hat. He's clearly not from this neighborhood. Not peasant, not merchant. Another samurai, perhaps, but not local. He glances at you, then away. A beat too long. You store that detail somewhere in the back of your mind. Not for immediate use. Just filed away. Like a paper tied with string. Labeled, curious. After all, you're not just a man with a sword. You're a man who notices things. You return home with that yuzu-scented charcoal bundle in hand, still thinking about the stranger by the canal. But he's gone now, and you're not the sort to jump at shadows. Still curious. The charcoal vendor mentioned nothing, and if there were something off, truly off, she'd have said it. Those vendors know everything, often before it happens. Inside, the house has taken on its daytime hum. The kitchen is rattling with midday preparations, a gentle chorus of ladles, chopping knives, and the occasional burst of steam from the rice cooker. Not the modern electric kind, of course, just a thick iron pot over a carefully banked charcoal flame. You pass a young maid fanning the coals with a bamboo paddle, her face rosy from the heat. She greets you with a bow and doesn't flinch when you walk past. Good. That means you're not as intimidating before noon as your brother is. In the central courtyard, the koi ripple across the pond's surface, chasing flecks of something edible or perhaps imaginary. The stones are cool underfoot, their surfaces still damp from the gardener's morning rinse. You stop to adjust a lantern that's tilted slightly off-center. It's a small thing, but in your house, small things matter. Everything speaks. Crooked lanterns, dusty shelves, overboiled soup. They're all reflections of your inner state, or at least that's what your grandfather always said between sips of bitter tea. You head into the private hall to meet your tutor, a once revered scholar now partially retired and deeply allergic to incompetence. He's been in your family's service since before you could walk, and though his eyesight is fading, his tongue is as sharp as any blade on your rack. He gestures you inside without looking up from his scroll. Late, he says. You're not. The session begins with kanban readings, classical Chinese texts written with obscure annotations that make your brain itch. You read aloud. He corrects your inflection. You repeat. Then it's on to poetry composition. You write a seasonal verse about dew and disappointment. He approves, barely. Here's your mainstream historical fact for today. Samurai weren't just warriors. By the Edo period, they were expected to maintain scholarly refinement, especially among upper ranks. Calligraphy, Confucian texts, and poetry were all part of the package, like intellectual side quests in a very high-stakes RPG. Now, for your quirky tidbit. Some samurai, especially younger sons with too much free time and not enough patience, composed entire volumes of prank poetry, little satirical gems written in elegant form but filled with toilet humor or political jabs. One nobleman even wrote a haiku about how loud his neighbor's chickens were and left it hanging on their gate. You consider this but wisely refrain from testing it on your tutor. As your lesson winds down, he hands you a scroll. Not for reading yet. It's a diplomatic briefing. The magistrate's visit this afternoon will involve more than polite small talk. There's a boundary dispute brewing between 2 local farmers, and your family may be asked to mediate. On paper, this is a routine affair. In reality, it's a festival of passive aggression with a side of unspoken bribes. Don't fall asleep during the rice tax figures this time. Your tutor mutters. I wasn't asleep. I was resting my eyes. With snoring, you bow in concession. Just as you're rolling the scroll up, a servant appears with a fresh set of robes, your formal hakama and kamishimo. This isn't ceremonial wear, but it's definitely more structured than your lounging kimono. Dark blue, stiff-collared, with family crests on each shoulder like little watchful eyes. You change quickly, adjusting your obi and making sure your sleeves fall just right. The house quiets slightly as you prepare to leave. It always does, as if acknowledging the shift in your role, from brother, son, reader of overly long poetry assignments to public figure. Outside, the magistrate's retinue arrives with all the grace of a one-wheeled cart. 2 oxen, 3 retainers, and an absurdly squeaky palanquin. You greet them formally, noting that the magistrate himself is even shorter than you remembered, and just as sweaty. His fan is already out, fluttering desperately at his own face. And yes, he still chews with his mouth open. You lead him into the reception room. It's been freshly swept, the tatami softened with floral powder, and a new incense cone set in the corner. Sandalwood, calming, not too rich. A pot of tea is already warming on the brazier. You pour it without spilling. A small victory. Here's the thing about diplomacy in the Edo period. It's slow. No one blurts. Everything takes place in delicate spirals, praise, apology, whether talk, slow descent into actual content. You keep your face neutral as the magistrate discusses last year's rice yield. He has spinach in his teeth. You pretend not to notice. When the farmers are brought in, the temperature rises several degrees, not physically but emotionally. Each bows, each mutters a greeting, and each tries not to glance murderously at the other. You present the land map with the area in question carefully marked. It's a sliver, maybe half a patty's length, but pride's involved now, which means logic has left the building. Historians still argue whether disputes like these were secretly encouraged by local lords to maintain authority. The magistrate says at one point, speaking as if narrating to the ceiling. You nod, unsure if that's a test. You offer a solution that includes seasonal shared use, 2 boundary markers, and the promise of a neutral third party to observe the harvest. The magistrate blinks, then slowly nods. Afterward, one of the farmers sneaks you a small wrapped parcel, probably dried plums or miso crackers, as thanks. You don't accept it, but the gesture warms something in your chest. Not everything is bureaucratic sludge. As the magistrate leaves, fanning himself all the way down the road, you feel your shoulders ease. Your family won't need to untangle this for at least another season. You turn back toward home. Your formal sleeves flap lightly in the breeze. The koi scatter as you pass the pond. The charcoal you bought earlier now perfumes the kitchen, where your midday meal simmers, ready and humble. The man by the canal? Still absent. But tomorrow is another day. The warmth of early noon clings to the sleeves of your formal robes as you return from the courtyard. Inside, your home is a quiet rhythm of maintenance and calm, a hum that runs beneath the sound of your steps. You pass through the long corridor again, your fingers brushing the grain of the cedar panels. Your head still buzzes a little from the farmer's tense standoff, but you're not allowed to dwell. No samurai lingers in thought too long unless he wants to walk straight into a pole. You stop by your room briefly to change. Off come the formal hakama and crisp kamishimo. Back on go your lighter house robes, dyed in the earthy indigo that conceals everyday dust and drips from tea or ink. The sleeves are looser, your belt more forgiving, and with a sigh of theatrical drama. No one's watching, but still, you tie the final knot and stretch your arms overhead. Your next task is a quiet one. Checking in on the storehouse and overseeing the breakfast rice distribution ledgers. It's a task you share with your eldest brother, but since he's out on patrol duty today, you get the pleasure of it solo. Lucky you. You step into the kara, the earthen-walled storehouse, and are greeted by the faint, grainy scent of roasted rice husks and preserved miso. Thick beams overhead catch flecks of light through the slatted window, and a single oil lamp flickers near the record-keeping desk. Stacked against the walls are boxes sealed with rope and ink stamped with your family crest. Each holds ingredients, some fragrant, some plain, all meant for daily life and the endless tide of morning meals. Here's your historical fact of the moment. During the Edo period, breakfast was the most important meal of the day for a samurai household. It was meant to nourish both body and spirit before the day's duties, usually taken very early, and always centered around rice, miso soup, and seasonal pickles, though variation was a matter of rank, region, and whether your cook was nursing a grudge. You flip open the inventory ledger and scan the neat brushstrokes. The numbers check out. You make a small note about the dwindling daikon supply. Your household goes through pickled radish like a modern teenager tears through phone data, and then move on to inspect the kitchen prep. In the rear kitchen, 2 cooks are kneeling over their cutting boards. One is dicing preserved plums with a blade so sharp it could double as a philosophical metaphor. The other is mixing barley into the morning rice, because your uncle insists on it for intestinal reasons, and has become weirdly vocal about digestion lately. As you observe, a servant quietly hands you a small cup of mujica, roasted barley tea. It's not breakfast tea time, technically, but nobody wants a cranky junior head of house pacing around on an empty stomach. You sip. It tastes like summer in a clay cup. Slightly nutty, slightly bitter, wholly grounding. You nod at the cooks, satisfied, then move on to one of the quieter tasks, something you genuinely enjoy, inspecting the morning incense stock. Because, yes, breakfast smells matter too. You crouch before a lacquered chest filled with incense cones and coiled sticks. Each is labeled in careful brush script: agarwood, sandalwood, clove, pine resin, cinnamon bark. For most homes, this would be a luxury, but for a samurai household, scent was as much about discipline as indulgence. A well-scented home showed order, cleanliness, and reverence for space. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Edo-era samurai actually played incense games, where blindfolded guests would try to identify scents by smell alone. A wrong guess meant you had to compose a poem on the spot or drink a mildly embarrassing amount of sake. Essentially, it was historical truth or dare, but with fewer spin-the-bottles and more nose hairs involved. You select a subtle blend, cypress bark and dried mandarin peel, for tomorrow's morning chamber. It's calming, not too forward, and unlikely to trigger your mother's increasingly dramatic sneezes. You make a mental note to set it by the sun-facing windows where the warmth helps it bloom more fully. Outside again, the sun has tilted past its zenith. The garden is humming quietly, the dragonflies skipping across the pond like bored schoolboys on errand. You take a moment to crouch near the basin and splash your face with cool water. Your reflection ripples, warps, disappears. Historians still argue whether daily rituals like these were designed purely for household order, or if they served as subtle control mechanisms, ways for feudal lords to keep even their high-ranking samurai tethered to routine. You stand and shake the water from your hands. Whether it's habit or control, it does work. The rhythm keeps you sane, or at least reasonably civil. A bell rings from the North Hall, short, sharp, not an emergency, just a signal. Your cousin has arrived. The one who speaks 3 languages, knows a frankly suspicious amount about foreign spices, and once tried to convince you that sweet potatoes could be used as weapons. You don't know whether he's joking half the time, but he always smells faintly of cloves and smugness. You meet him in the receiving room, and, of course, he's already halfway through a cup of tea. He raises it like a toast. Still hoarding the umebashi like family treasure? He smirks. You ignore that. Barely. He brings gifts: dried ginger from Nagasaki, some oddly flat fish jerky, and a packet of sakura salt meant for next month's radish pickle spectacular. You thank him, but you're already plotting which jars you'll hide before your uncle starts experimenting. You walk together through the garden, comparing notes on breakfast trends across other households. He tells you about one retainer who insists on grilled river fish every morning, another who's convinced that natto, the slimy fermented soybean paste, improves sword handling. The science is dubious, but still, the conversation floats easy between you, just like old times. You're grateful for the company, and for the distraction. Even the stranger from the canal fades briefly from your mind. The day softens into afternoon. Your cousin leaves with promises of next week's visit, and you return to your chamber for a brief rest. Just a few minutes before evening chores begin. You sit by the window. The light is soft now, angled and golden. You think about the breakfast trays prepared for tomorrow. You think about incense and radishes and charcoal and books. You let your eyes close, just for a breath. And somewhere in the stillness, the scent of yuzu charcoal lingers, just faintly enough to feel like a whisper. When you wake, the light has changed again. The golden warmth of late afternoon has dulled to a steely, pearled hue, still bright, but gentler, like the sun's trying not to wake the baby next door. You sit up slowly, limbs a little heavy from your nap, and blink toward the low horizon where the slatted shoji filters evening's approach. Time to rise. The house doesn't wait. You pad across the tatami mat, stretching your arms behind your back with an unceremonious groan that, were it any louder, might earn you a sideways look from the senior maid. You decide to skip the vocal dramatics. Just this once. Before the evening tasks begin, you have one important stop. The inner shrine. Every samurai house worth its salt has one. A small wooden altar nestled in a private chamber, used for daily offerings, ancestor honorings, and the occasional whispered wish that no one else is supposed to hear. Yours is a modest but lovingly tended corner of the house, framed with fresh seasonal flowers and a hanging scroll inked with a line from the Lotus Sutra. This evening, you light a tiny square of incense. You kneel, bow twice, and place a small dish of dried rice and a curl of seaweed onto the tray. They'll be replaced tomorrow, of course, but the symbolism matters. Discipline, respect, continuity. These are the bones of your life. Historical fact break. Samurai households of the Edo period practiced daily Shinto or Buddhist offerings, especially before meals. This wasn't just about piety, it was also about reinforcing order. The gods were offered food first, then ancestors, then the living. You were literally second to dead people. Fun, right? As the smoke drifts upward, you think briefly of your grandfather, the one with the famous mustache and even more famous temper. He once made a servant cry just by arching a single brow. You inherited neither the brow nor the intimidation, but you try your best with your own brand of stern silence. Sometimes it works. Sometimes people just ask if you're cold. Ritual complete, you rise and head to the evening prep room. This is where things start to blur into tomorrow's breakfast all over again. You'd think you could go a few hours without thinking about rice. But no, the rice waits for no one. Tonight, the task is rice polishing. A low-ranking retainer is already seated at the hulling station, spinning a wooden wheel that rubs the outer husk from the grains. You squat beside him, examine the texture of the freshly polished rice with your fingertips, and nod. Satisfying. Smooth, almost glassy. Enough polish for high-ranking guests, but not so much that it screams overcompensation. Here's your quirky detail. Some Edo households employed rotating rice polishers powered by foot treadles, basically a medieval elliptical machine. Whether this counts as exercise or cruel innovation is, shall we say, up for interpretation. You tried it once. Your calves didn't recover for 3 days. You help measure the polished rice into a cedar box, weighing it against a balance scale etched with tiny characters. Precise weight is key not just to stretch the household rations, but to make sure Uncle Digestive Health doesn't launch into another salt rice lecture. You seal the box with a lid and mark it, morning, guest/inner hall. Historians still argue whether these meticulous divisions in rice handling were about hospitality etiquette or covert class signaling. Was it true devotion to protocol, or just a very elaborate way to flex? The answer probably depends on whether you were the one eating or serving. As you move on to inspect tomorrow's miso supply, a faint clatter echoes down the corridor. Someone's training in the inner yard. You recognize the rhythmic cadence, 3 wooden strikes, a pivot, a step back. It's your younger cousin, again, probably practicing his kata instead of helping with food prep like he promised. You sigh. Maybe you'll throw a pickled plum at him later. Not as a punishment, just as a well-placed snack. Back inside, the air carries a delicious undercurrent. The cooks have started boiling tomorrow's dashi stock, kombu and katsuobushi, simmered just long enough to coax the umami from the depths. That scent alone could raise the dead, or at least make them hungry. You poke your head into the kitchen and catch one of the apprentices sneaking a sip from the ladle. He freezes mid-sip like a criminal caught mid-heist. You raise a brow, channeling your grandfather's ghost. He gulps, bows deeply, and mutters, "Quality control." You let him off with a warning. Mostly because you also sneak tastes when no one's looking. Honor may be a sword, but a full stomach is a shield. Before heading back to your chamber, you stop by the veranda to catch the last of the daylight. The sky has shifted again, now a wash of rose and charcoal, with a single crow silhouetted against the dimming ridgeline. Down below, in the distant part of the town, you hear a drumbeat, the evening fire watch patrol, tapping out the hours in that slow, patient cadence. You remember what your grandfather used to say, "When the drums beat, the rice has cooled, and the house begins to breathe. You still don't entirely know what that means, but it sounds poetic enough that you've started saying it too. Night's coming, and with it, the final wind down of the day. One last chore remains. Selecting tomorrow's breakfast pickles. Don't laugh. This is a serious matter. In a side cupboard, you keep a rotating selection of seasonal tsukmino, radish, cucumber, burdock root, and, your current favorite, eggplant with red shiso. You select 3, arrange them in tiny clay dishes. Label each for tomorrow's tray. You pause over 1, cucumber, sliced thin and marinated in ginger, and debate eating it now. You don't. Not out of willpower, but because you can already hear your aunt's voice from 2 rooms away warning, "If you touch tomorrow's tray, I'll replace your futon with a straw mat." Finally, the sky is fully dark. Paper lanterns flicker along the outer corridors. You bow once more toward the shrine and make your way toward the bathhouse. The scent of hinoki steam is already drifting down the hall. But that's for later. For now, you press one hand to the wall outside your room. Cool. Solid. Your world, carefully ordered, fragrant with broth and cedar and smoke. Tomorrow's breakfast is nearly ready. So yes, sleep well, little samurai. You've earned it. The clatter of sandals on wood is always sharper at night. You can't explain it. Really, some weird trick of acoustics or just the way everything else gets so quiet after dusk. But every step echoes like a punctuation mark. Still, you make your way across the hallway, past the pantry, past the courtyard where the crickets are already gossiping, toward the family bathhouse. Now, don't get too excited. This isn't some modern spa with eucalyptus towels and plinky background music. The Edo-period bath experience is, let's call it rustic elegance. Heavy on the rustic. But it's part of your nightly rhythm. And a clean body, after all, helps welcome a clean tomorrow. The bathhouse is a separate wooden structure, tucked near the back of the compound. It smells like wet wood and old soap, maybe not everyone's favorite aroma, but to you it's comfort itself. Steam curls through the slats in the wall, thick with the scent of hinoki cypress, and a dash of citrus peel from the leftover yuzu your aunt threw in for skin brightness. Your skeptical but glowing skin never hurt anyone. Now, here's your mainstream historical fact. Edo-period samurai bathed daily when possible, not out of luxury, but duty. Cleanliness was tied to discipline, and discipline to honor. Even the Tokugawa shoguns were famously fastidious. If your armpits offended someone important, your head might wind up rolling, so you see why soap got serious. Inside, the room is dim but cozy. A cedar bucket, a stool, and a ladle await you beside the large wooden tub. No standing showers here. You strip down and sit, pouring warm water over your shoulders. It's not exactly glamorous, but the warmth seeps into your muscles like magic. You lather with rice bran soap, rough but effective, scrubbing gently at the day's grime. The trick is not to let your mind wander too far, or you'll start composing complaint letters to your cousin again. Just breathe. Let the steam soften your brain like tofu. Then comes the reward, slipping into the tub. You lower yourself into the steaming bath with all the grace of a well-cooked daikon, limbs turning to noodles almost immediately. It's the kind of comfort that feels ancestral. Like maybe your great-great-great-grandfather also sighed like this after a long day of pickling and sword polishing. Who knows? Quirky tidbit time. Some samurai households added sake or persimmon leaves to the bathwater, either for medicinal purposes or just because someone said it worked and everyone nodded. Historians still argue whether these bath additives were rooted in science or superstition. You suspect both. You once bathed in miso soup by mistake, but that was a prank and a story for another time. As you soak, you listen. Not for anything in particular, just the soft crackle of wood, the drip of water off the eaves, and that one bullfrog in the nearby pond who insists on being part of every night's soundtrack. You start naming him. You settle on Lord Ribbit. Eventually, the water cools just enough to remind you it's time to get out before you turn into a soggy rice cake. You climb out carefully, towel off with a square of linen that somehow manages to be both too small and scratchy, and step back into your yukata. You're still warm from the bath, which makes the night air feel extra crisp as you walk back to your quarters. The lanterns flicker softly, casting sleepy shadows against the paper walls. Someone is humming a lullaby, a kitchen maid, maybe, and you pass a servant carefully trimming the wick of an oil lamp, his face glowing gold. You pass by the kitchen one last time. It's dark now, but a faint scent of simmered kelp still lingers in the air like a closing curtain. You resist the urge to poke your head in. You're not hungry, just curious. That's what you tell yourself. Your sleeping room is simple, but it holds all the magic of ritual. The futon has been laid out already, fluffed, straightened, and turned down with precision that would make a military officer weep with joy. A small ceramic basin sits beside it, in case you need to rinse your hands again. Next to that, a folded letter from your aunt reminding you not to oversleep. Classic. You kneel for a moment, facing the western wall. Not for prayer exactly, more like recalibration. Just a breath, a stillness, a chance to catch up with yourself. You slip beneath the futon's cover. It's warm, faintly scented with cedar and starch. Your head sinks into the buckwheat pillow, not exactly cloud-like, but supportive. You'll take it. Now, here's the part most people forget. The samurai weren't all swordplay and standoffish poetry. They worried about money, about their rank, about their kids becoming merchants, about breakfast pickles going soggy overnight. Some of those worries still echo, tucked between the cracks in the wooden walls. You stare at the ceiling for a moment. Listen again. The frog is still at it. Lord Ribbit, long may he reign. Somewhere down the hall, someone is snoring. Someone else is practicing their flute, badly. And somewhere even further away, in the great hush of the city, a bell tolls for evening prayers. And just as you're drifting, your stomach growls. Not loud, but enough to make you question whether 3 pickles and a bowl of rice truly counts as nourishment. Too late now. You'll survive. Probably. You turn onto your side. Shift your knees. Settle into the worn softness of the futon like a spoon into a bento box. The scent of wood smoke, citrus, and rice lulls you. Tomorrow's duties will come soon enough. But tonight, you are clean. You are fed. You are home. The rooster hasn't even cleared his throat yet, but you're already awake. Not out of anxiety or excitement, just habit. Like a thread pulled tight across time, your samurai rhythm is sewn into the pre-dawn silence. One eye opens, then the other, and just like that, your day begins, even before the sun thinks about showing up. You push the futon aside and sit up slowly, not out of reverence or dramatics, more because standing too fast after a warm night on buckwheat might invite a surprise faceplant. The room is dim, lit only by the glow of a half-melted candle someone forgot to snuff, its light wiggling like a koi in a pond. You pull on your daily yukata, this one pattern subtly in indigo and gray stripes, and tie it with a simple sash. You're not dressing to impress. Yet, first stop, the family shrine. You pad softly across the hallway, past a sleeping servant, and kneel before the butsudan. The incense is already laid out, along with fresh water, a pinch of rice, and a very small pickled plum that, frankly, seems too delicious for the dead. But you don't argue with your ancestors. You light the incense and bow twice, clap twice, then bow once more. It's not a performance. It's an alignment. Your past selves, your family line, your duties today, they all get folded into this moment. Mainstream historical fact here: household shrines were common among samurai families, blending Shinto reverence with Buddhist quietude. Even warriors feared disappointing grandma's ghost. Your stomach rumbles lightly again. Classic. But breakfast isn't a grab-and-go affair in Edo society. There's no corner bakery, no convenience store stocked with rice balls and energy drinks. No, you have to wait. And before you eat, there is tea. You shuffle toward the veranda, drawn by the scent. Your cousin, yes, the slightly bossy one, has already begun preparing the first brew of the day. She's crouched over the small iron kettle, coaxing the charcoal flame with a practiced breath, the kind that could probably start a forest fire if she felt dramatic enough. She gestures without looking. You kneel beside her, rubbing sleep from your eyes. The tea room is open on one side, letting in the cool morning air. You can hear a sparrow giving a TED talk to a row of plum blossoms. Now comes the quirky tidbit. Early morning tea for the samurai wasn't always matcha. In fact, bancha, a coarser, roasted tea, was the go-to for mornings. It was cheaper, smokier, and, some would say, less likely to turn your guts into liquid poetry on an empty stomach. Matcha, with its ceremonial gravitas, was saved for more refined gatherings. This tea is survival. She pours without speaking. The cups are small, imperfectly glazed, still warm from rinsing. You take yours with both hands. Sip. The flavor is toasty, almost nutty. Not bitter. Tastes like clarity. You both sit for a moment, letting the quiet carry the weight of your thoughts. Then she says something about the rice shipment arriving late, and just like that, the bubble pops. You're back in the day. You head back to your quarters, passing one of the younger servants sweeping the walkway with more enthusiasm than coordination. You smile politely and keep walking before they can ask you to help. Your formal kimono is laid out. It's nothing flashy, just a simple indigo with a subdued family crest embroidered on the back. You dress efficiently, like someone who's done this a few hundred times. Which surprise you have. As you adjust your sash, your father's voice rings out from the corridor. Not a yell, just a measured reminder. Inspection is in 1 hour. Great. See, breakfast isn't just food. It's timing, precision, reputation, especially when higher-ranking eyes might glance your way across the rice bowl. Historians still argue whether samurai households placed more value on martial readiness or domestic harmony, but this morning, both seem equally dangerous to neglect. If the rice is cold or the miso soup underseasoned, you may not lose your head, but you might lose face. And in Edo society, that's almost worse. You head toward the kitchen compound. The air shifts as you pass under the eaves. Smoke, steam, something tangy, something sweet is happening. The breakfast ballet. Inside, it's a flurry of controlled chaos. Knives thump against cutting boards. Fire crackles under iron pots. Someone's shouting about a missing daikon. Someone else is frantically stirring miso with a bamboo paddle like they're trying to summon a weather god. Your uncle is overseeing the rice cooker, an ancient cauldron that could double as a war drum. He opens the lid, checks the grains, nods solemnly. The rice is perfect. Not too wet, not too dry. You consider composing a haiku on the spot, but your cousin glares at you. And then there's the miso soup. The base is dashi, kelp and dried bonito flakes, steeped just long enough to coax out umami without turning the whole thing into ocean stew. Into that, they stir in the miso paste, dissolved with a wooden whisk. Then tofu cubes, a few scallions, maybe some seasonal greens if you're lucky. There's also tsukmino, pickled vegetables, that vary by region, season, and your aunt's mood. Today it's thin-sliced cucumber and eggplant, glistening from an overnight soak. One bite will make your tongue pucker and your eyebrows salute. Your personal contribution? Setting the trays. You arrange lacquered bowls on low wooden stands, placing each item with the same care you'd give to a sword in its sheath. Rice, soup, pickles, a small square of grilled fish, slightly charred at the edges. A wedge of tamagoyaki, sweet omelet rolled with surgical precision. Even breakfast is a battlefield of aesthetic balance. You glance around. The meal is nearly complete. Your heart does a little victory dance. But don't celebrate too soon. The lord of the house hasn't arrived yet, and he always spots the one misaligned chopstick. Still, as the bowls steam, and the sun begins to yawn over the tile roofs outside, you take a breath. A real one. The kind that fills you with heat and memory. It's almost time. Footsteps echo down the hall. Slow, deliberate, not quite dramatic, but definitely meaningful. You straighten your posture instinctively. Everyone does. Even the rice seems to brace itself. Because here comes your father, the patriarch of the household. And while he's not the shouty type, he radiates, "I know if your pickles are off" energy. He enters the breakfast chamber like a poem walking upright. Dark hakama, a subdued kimono, hair tied back with not a strand out of place. He nods once, just once, and takes his seat at the head of the low lacquered table. This is the moment the whole house has been choreographing since the candle sputtered its first pre-dawn gasp. You follow suit and kneel beside your tray. Not directly beside your father. He's earned the extra elbow room, but close enough to catch any verbal darts lobbed your way if you fumble your chopsticks. Across from you sits your younger sibling, the one with the permanently smug face and a hidden stash of pickled plums. You offer a half-smile. They reply with a dramatic yawn. The room stills. Then your father says, "Ida de kamasu," and everyone echoes it. Hands come together. Bow slightly. The meal begins. Mainstream historical fact time. Ida de kamasu literally means, "I humbly receive." And it's not just about food. It acknowledges the farmers, the cooks, the animals, the ancestors. Breakfast in an Edo samurai home is part prayer, part performance, part power play. If your rice is clumped or your soup cold, it's not just poor cooking. It's a spiritual blunder. You lift your chopsticks. The rice is flawless. Each grain holds its shape like tiny polished pearls. You dip into the miso soup. It's smoky, with a comforting warmth that spreads up through your cheeks. The pickles? Crunchy enough to break a tension-filled silence. Then comes the grilled fish. A small slice of Thai, sea bream, glazed with a whisper of soy sauce and mirin. Flakes at the touch, still steaming. You take a bite. It's perfect. Across the room, your cousin eats like they're auditioning for a role in a silent no play. Delicate, poised, annoyingly elegant. You try to match their energy but end up slurping your soup a little too loudly. Your father raises an eyebrow. Just one. That's worse than shouting. But this is where things get interesting. Your uncle clears his throat. Loudly. This is not a cold. It's a statement. He begins discussing, loudly enough for the entire table to hear, the growing concern over rice pricing in the nearby village. Apparently, local merchants have been skimping on weights, and there's talk of re-inspecting market scales. Your father nods. You nod too, though you're not entirely sure what a scale scandal really involves. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some samurai actually doubled as local administrators, overseeing rice storage, grain taxes, and even weighing procedures. Breakfast could very well involve logistics, complaints, and, surprise, moral philosophy. A moment later, your sibling brings up sword polishers. Again, they've apparently read that some swordsmiths were charging double for inferior work. Your father, never one to miss an educational tangent, launches into a lecture about the virtues of vigilance and blade maintenance. And there it is, your cue. You mention, casually, that your own blade could use a new saya, scabbard, and that perhaps you might visit the lacquerer after breakfast. This sparks another mini-debate about lacquer quality. Historians still argue whether Edo-period lacquerware peaked during this century or the next, and now your breakfast table does too. Voices rise, but only slightly. The rice doesn't deserve shouting. You continue eating, slowly, thoughtfully, pretending to absorb both the fish and the philosophical implications of lacquer layer thickness. At some point, your aunt appears with a tray of refills, more rice, fresh pickles, a refill of tea. She moves like wind through pine needles. Not a sound, not a splash. You're not entirely convinced she isn't secretly a ninja. Then, just as quickly, she vanishes. The meal resumes. Conversation slows. The food disappears. The mood shifts. Now it's all about the ending. Because the final few bites of a samurai breakfast aren't eaten mindlessly. They're intentional. A bite of rice, a sip of tea, a glance toward the garden. Outside, sunlight has finally arrived, sliding across the tiles like a shy cat. The air smells like toasted seaweed and steam. Somewhere, a bamboo fountain clacks, a gentle, rhythmic thunk that reminds you time is still passing. You put down your chopsticks. Your tray is clean. Your heart is calmer than it was an hour ago. But you're not done. You gather your tray and carry it, kneeling before your father to thank him for the meal. He nods again, still just once. This time, though, the eyebrow remains still. Progress. Your cousin offers you a discreet thumbs up as you both retreat toward the kitchen. You do not return the gesture. Samurai cool must be preserved. Back in the kitchen, the aftermath is already being cleaned. Trays stacked, bowls rinsed, pickles repickled for the next round. The servants move quickly but not frantically, their rhythm already shifting to prep for midday meals and whatever chaos the day has stored in its sleeves. You thank the cook, a quiet bow, a muttered compliment. She looks surprised, then pleased, then mutters something about needing more miso paste. You step outside again, this time into full light. The sun warms your face. Your stomach is full, your mind is clear, and your day officially begins. But you'll carry that breakfast with you. Not just the taste, but the silence, the cadence, the blend of reverence and routine. In the Edo period, breakfast wasn't just fuel. It was an anchor, a daily ceremony to ground you before the sword left its sheath or the ink hit the paper. And whether your sword strikes true today or not, at least your pickles were on point. The moment you step back inside, the quiet hum of a house returning to normal hums around you. Breakfast is over, trays are washed, and the floor has that freshly wiped cedar scent. You peel off the outer robe you wore for the meal and feel the difference immediately. Lighter, freer, ready to move, but not too fast. A samurai doesn't sprint unless it's a duel or a fire, preferably both. The next phase of your morning? Tea. And no, not just slurping down some casual leaf water. This is Edo period Japan. Tea is an art form, a spiritual practice, and, occasionally, a personality test disguised as a hot beverage. You shuffle toward the tea house in the garden, feet just barely whispering against the wooden walkway. You already know that the family's chajin, your uncle's childhood friend who took a vow of silence except when judging pottery glaze, will be waiting inside. Before you even open the paper door, you hear the slow, rhythmic whisking of matcha. Frothy, deliberate, meditative. And that gentle clack of bamboo against ceramic? Music to your mildly caffeinated soul. Stepping inside, you bow lower than usual. As expected here, the tea house is sacred space, stripped of excess. Tatami mats, soft, diffused light, and a single scroll bearing calligraphy so delicate it might have been whispered onto the paper. Your eyes adjust to the dimness, and you take your seat with practiced ease. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Samurai weren't just warriors, they were cultural connoisseurs. The Edo period saw many of them engaging in refined arts like calligraphy, ikebana, flower arranging, and, of course, the tea ceremony, or shinoyu. It wasn't just sipping. It was silence, symbolism, and self-discipline, basically warrior mindfulness with a hint of caffeine. You accept the chawan tea bowl when it's presented to you, warm to the touch, thick, rustic. You rotate it gently in your hands, appreciating the rough glaze. 3 turns. Sip. 3 breaths. Sip again. And here's your quirky tidbit. There were full-blown tea schools, like actual lineages, arguing over whether the bamboo whisk should be rinsed clockwise or counterclockwise. Some even held that stirring too loudly disrupted the soul of the tea. Can you imagine your morning latte judged on spiritual vibrations? The tea is strong, slightly bitter, but comforting. You can feel the steam crawl up into your nose, clearing the remnants of miso and fish from your sinuses. It's not refreshing in the lemony-scented way, more like a warm towel pressed to your brain. Focus, grounding, stillness. You listen to the subtle garden sounds, crickets still arguing from last night, a crow somewhere in the distance mocking a cat, and the reliable thunk of the Shirshiro-doshi water fountain. The scent of pine needles and moss drifts in. It's not incense, but it feels sacred all the same. Across from you, the tea master finally speaks. Just one word. Weather. That's it. This launches a 20-minute discussion. No, a philosophical wandering about the humidity's effect on rice paper drying, the melancholy of summer winds, and whether a pine cone is better viewed fallen or clinging. You nod, sip, and add your own poetic nonsense. This is the real samurai drama, measured metaphors and how deeply you can sigh without looking affected. Now, you might be wondering, where does all this sit in the breakfast ritual? Well, here's where historians still argue whether the tea practice was a natural continuation of the meal or its own separate rite entirely. Some scrolls imply it followed immediately after. Others suggest it only occurred on non-training days. Either way, your house treats it as essential to digestion and decorum. You leave the tea house lighter than when you entered. Not because of the caffeine. Not even because of the poetry, but because there's something deeply satisfying about doing absolutely nothing with complete focus. Try that at a modern brunch spot and see how long you last before someone pulls out a phone. As you walk back through the garden, sunlight filters through bamboo leaves in such a cinematic way you half expect a monk to hand you a life lesson. But no monks today. Just a pair of servant boys hauling fresh water toward the kitchen, sloshing and laughing. One of them is barefoot. The other wears socks that definitely do not match. You suppress a grin. Not very samurai, but very human. Inside, the house is quietly shifting toward its daily rhythm. Scrolls to be written. Training sessions to prepare. Political gossip to dissect. But before all that, there's one last morning stop. Incense and meditation. Yes, really. You've had fish, soup, pickles, tea, philosophy, and now it's time to smell smoke and try not to think about anything. A true breakfast of champions. The incense chamber is dim, lined with delicate screens and filled with the sort of quiet that makes your ears ring. A brazier smolders in the center. Beside it, a servant places a fresh stick of sandalwood-scented incense. Crackles softly as the fire kisses it. You kneel, straighten your back, and rest your hands palm down on your thighs. Close your eyes. Breathe in. Exhale. And now try not to think about the gossip your cousin dropped earlier about that swordsmith with 2 wives. Nope, that's cheating. Focus. The incense spirals upward, lazy and fragrant. The scent reminds you of temples, of your grandfather's study, of festivals when you were too young to carry a blade. This is memory smoke, made for drifting, not clinging. You stay still for what feels like forever. Your knees start to ache, but you don't move, because movement would ruin the spell. It's only when the incense stick burns to its final inch that you rise, slowly, reverently. A servant appears like mist and carries the brazier away. You bow once more to the silence, as if thanking it for its patience. And that, officially, ends the ritual side of your morning. You've eaten, you've sipped, you've meditated. Your body's nourished. Your mind's focused. Your inner poet has been lightly roasted over philosophical tea. Now, finally, you are ready to face the day. But don't get too excited. You've got errands to run. And if the tea master was right about the humidity, your lacquered sandals are going to squeak all the way into town. Before your feet even touch the pebbled path leading out of the estate, someone calls your name. It's not a shout, exactly, more like an announcement with a hint of threat. It's your cousin, the one who takes his samurai duties a little too seriously. He's already dressed in full kamishimo, his face arranged into what he thinks is a noble scowl, but honestly makes him look like he's been denied breakfast. You nod in the time-honored tradition of, yes, I see you, and no, I'm not engaging unless absolutely necessary. But alas, duty calls. Literally. Your uncle has assigned you both a morning errand, retrieving fresh supplies from the apothecary and checking in on the ceramicist who's been crafting a new tea bowl. Sounds simple, right? You slip into your soft, straw-soled sandals, grab your short sword, it's not just for flair, and slide open the outer gate. The sun hits you like a polite oven, already warm despite the early hour. The humidity, let's just say your hair has surrendered before the battle even begins. The streets of Edo are already awake. Vendors are shouting about fish so fresh they're basically still plotting an escape. A woman rushes by with a tray of steamed buns balanced like a halo over her head. Children dart between carts, shouting rhymes, while a dog with more confidence than cleanliness trots ahead of you like it owns the district. Your cousin insists on walking in silence, which is funny considering he keeps muttering about road dust and merchant dishonor. You let him. Gives you more room to enjoy the smell of grilled eel coming from a roadside stall. Time for your mainstream historical fact. During the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, samurai like you weren't just warriors. Many, especially in peaceful times, were bureaucrats, scholars, or errand runners for the clan. The Bushido Code didn't include a clause about dodging apothecary trips. Sorry. Your first stop is the herbalist. The shop is half open, its blue Norn curtains swaying like sleepy flags. You duck inside and are hit with a wave of earthy, peppery, almost citrusy scent, like someone tried to boil a forest and bottle the steam. The apothecary, a bent old man with a voice like dried seaweed, greets you by name. You return the courtesy, even bowing a little deeper than usual. He's known you since you were small enough to mistake cinnamon bark for candy. You only did that once. He hands you a wrapped bundle of crushed kudzu root, licorice strips, and dried plum for digestion. Not for you, your uncle swears by this mixture after eating fermented soybeans. Historians still argue whether this herbal mix had actual medicinal properties or just made people believe they were healthier while staying mildly pickled. Your cousin tries to haggle over the price, and you take this moment to inspect the jars along the wall. One contains what look like bird beaks, another might be dried seahorses or possibly tiny, tragic dragons. You don't ask. After exchanging polite bows, you step back into the street, parcel in hand. One errand down. Time for the quirky tidbit. There were urban legends that certain samurai paid extra for powdered tiger bone to boost their bravery. Problem was, there were no tigers in Japan. So most got horse bones. Expensive placebo with a side of nay. Next stop, the ceramicist's workshop. The path takes you past a small shrine where a cat is sleeping in the offertory box. You pause. Not to pray, just to appreciate the vibe. The cat has cracked the code. That's the real Zen. The ceramicist is your friend. A third son of a minor merchant who decided, against all common sense, to become an artisan instead of selling rice. His workshop is loud, full of slapping clay, spinning wheels, and the sound of hope cracking in a kiln. He sees you, wipes his hands on his robe, and grins like someone who's finally figured out how to make cups not explode at 900 degrees Celsius. He presents you with the tea bowl. It's wide, slightly uneven, glazed in a stormy gray-blue that catches the morning light like rain on a roof tile. You hold it gently, turning it in your hand. It's beautiful, flawed in exactly the right way. You pay him in rice vouchers and compliments, both of which he accepts with equal enthusiasm. Your cousin mumbles something about asymmetry being dishonorable. But you ignore him. There's more spirit in this bowl than in half the swords in your family's collection. As you head back toward home, you tuck the bowl carefully into your sleeve. One bump and it's an abstract sculpture. You walk slower than necessary. The sun is higher now. The streets more crowded. A festival banner flaps overhead, announcing something about peaches and music. A monk stands silently at a corner, ringing a bell and collecting alms with a bowl bigger than your face. You pause just long enough to drop in a coin and catch his nod. There's something steadying about his stillness, like a reminder that not every day has to be a duel, and not every hour has to be productive. Some things are just being. By the time you re-enter the estate, the house is alive with midday motion. Servants rush to and fro. Someone's hammering something suspiciously loudly near the stables, and your aunt is arguing with a messenger about whether persimmons were included in her last delivery. You hand over the apothecary parcel. You hand over the tea bowl. Then, just for a moment, you retreat to your room. Slide the door closed. See, the quiet wraps around you like cloth still warm from the sun. You've had breakfast. You've had tea. You've walked, bartered, blessed a cat shrine, and argued about bowls. And the day isn't even half over. You rest your back against the tatami wall, letting the moment breathe around you. There's still a trace of incense curling in the air from earlier, that soft sandalwood haze that clings to your sleeves and seems to hush the very molecules in the room. Your toes press against the cool straw mats. Outside, someone sweeps the stone path with long, whispering strokes. But the peace doesn't last long. There's a knock, 3 soft taps on the wood, and then the sliding door shutters open a finger width. It's the steward, the one who always looks vaguely displeased, like someone has misplaced a spoon, or worse, a scroll. He clears his throat and informs you. You've been invited, summoned, to the estate's inner garden. Your uncle wants to talk. You sigh. Not because of the request. It's just that every time your uncle wants to talk, it's either a lecture or a marriage proposal. You hope this time it's neither. You adjust your robe, straighten your sash, and rise. Down the corridor you go, past the carpentry repairs and half-assembled screen panels, until you reach the inner garden, a quiet square enclosed by walkways and shaded by a few aged pines and one proud plum tree, not yet in bloom but getting there. Your uncle sits under the eaves, a lacquer tray beside him, steam curling from a freshly poured bowl of tea. His face is hard to read, weathered, yes, but with eyes sharp as a bamboo edge. He gestures for you to sit. You do, careful not to disturb the gravel. He launches into his talk. It's about responsibility. It's about the clan. It's about how a samurai's life is shaped not only by swordsmanship, but by discipline, dignity, and breakfast choices that don't involve second helpings of rice. Okay, maybe he doesn't say that, but it's in his tone. Now here comes your historical fact. Samurai in the Edo period were heavily involved in civil administration. Many held hereditary positions and spent more time drafting reports than drawing swords. Your uncle, ever the administrator, is living proof. He slides a paper across the tray. It's an invitation to a poetry gathering, hosted by a nearby daimyo. You're expected to attend and write something, preferably in a classical style, nothing that rhymes with tofu. You accept the invitation with a bow and a promise to not embarrass the family with your mediocre calligraphy. He allows a small, rare smile, like moss growing between stones. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some samurai practiced composing death poems every morning. Yep. Start your day with a haiku about your own demise. It was meant to cultivate acceptance of impermanence. Or perhaps to keep breakfast spicy. As you leave the garden, your uncle remains seated, watching a bird peck at the moss near the stepping stones. He looks peaceful, which, given his usual disposition, is almost terrifying. You return to your room to fetch your writing kit. Inkstone, brush, paper so thin it rustles like leaves. You settle near the open shoji screen, legs folded, posture straight. The breeze flutters the paper's edge. It's like the air is daring you to write something profound. But what do you write? You think about the tea bowl, the apothecary, the cat shrine, your cousin's inability to bargain for herbs. You begin your poem. Under pine tree shade, steam curls from my morning bowl, silence tastes of rice. It's not bad. Might not win any contests, but it probably won't dishonor your ancestors either. Historians still argue whether these poetry events were truly spontaneous affairs of the spirit or carefully curated social performances, like kabuki, but with fewer costumes and more passive aggression. Your ink dries as a servant appears with a bundle. Fresh underrobe, pressed hakama, and your good kimono, the one with indigo wave patterns and slightly stiff sleeves. Time to dress for the poetry gathering. You go through the ritual motions, sliding fabric, tying cords, inspecting your appearance in a bronze mirror that somehow always makes your face look more solemn than it feels. You tuck your poem into your sleeve. It's crumpled only slightly. Then you make your way through the estate and out toward the main gate. The path to the daimyo's residence winds through back alleys and garden walls. The city is a little louder now, merchants shouting over one another, a monkey troupe doing acrobatics for coins, a rickshaw driver snoring against his wheel. You pass a vendor selling grilled chestnuts. You pause, consider buying some, but you're already cutting it close. Chestnuts will have to wait. Poetry calls. And here's something to tuck into your sleeve with your scroll. The road to power in Edo-period Japan wasn't just paved with sword fights. It was paved with ink, etiquette, and good seasonal metaphors. If you couldn't quote Chinese classics or properly reference the moon in autumn, well, enjoy the political cold shoulder. As you arrive at the estate, a boy in crisp robes ushers you toward the garden courtyard. There are other attendees, some lords, some scholars, a few samurai from other clans. One of them is already writing furiously. Another is just staring at a koi pond like the fish are whispering lines to him. You find your seat. A servant bows and sets a steaming cup of sencha at your side. It's grassy and slightly bitter, the way focus tastes. The host speaks briefly, then gestures. It begins. One by one, guests rise and recite their work. Some are lyrical, some are ponderous. One has so many seasonal references it could double as a farmer's almanac. Then it's your turn. You stand. You speak clearly. Your voice carries. There's a pause afterward, polite and deliberate, as the listeners let it settle. Your host nods. Someone murmurs, "Elegant." You sit down, heart still doing a quiet little dance behind your ribs. You sip your tea. The sun shifts in the sky. A breeze carries the scent of wisteria across the garden. You don't win the contest. A scholar with a metaphor about a river and heartbreak does. But your uncle will be pleased. You didn't disgrace the clan. And your cousin wrote a haiku with a fart joke in it, so hey, moral victory. Back home, your cousin is waiting at the gate, dramatically leaning on a broom as if it were a tragic prop. "Well?" he asks, like he's about to judge a play. You tell him you didn't win, but you weren't dishonored either. He nods solemnly, then grins. "Good. I told Uncle I'd prepare the punishment haiku just in case." Inside, the air has shifted. You can smell pickled daikon warming near the hearth, mingling with the sweet yeastiness of steamed rice. The servants bustle more than usual. Turns out, a guest is arriving this evening. One of those semi-important retainers with long stories, long sleeves, and suspiciously vague titles like advisor to the governor's cultural bureau, which, in samurai terms, means someone who might be able to get you posted somewhere with actual hills and less paperwork. But first, before the fawning and the gift offering and the forced polite laughter, you need to prepare a tray of welcoming food. Yes, this section is all about you taking charge of a ceremonial breakfast for dinner service. Because here's a historical truth. Samurai were expected to be excellent hosts. Etiquette wasn't optional, it was armor of a different sort. A poor tea ceremony could be just as damning as poor swordsmanship. And when it came to guests, the breakfast spread, yes, even at night, was a test of your household's refinement and your personal honor. You head to the kitchen, where chaos is already staging a coup. 2 pots are boiling. One of the apprentices has forgotten to salt the miso soup. And someone's dropped a handful of pickled plums into the rice bin. Again, you grab the lacquer tray and start assembling. 1 small bowl of rice, steamed, not too sticky, fluffed with practiced wrist flicks. Miso soup with silken tofu and a single slice of daikon. Grilled river fish, lightly salted and artfully crooked, like it leapt mid-air onto the plate. Pickled vegetables arranged in a circle like they're holding a silent meeting. A tiny dish of fermented soybeans with mustard, because you're not a coward. A wedge of rolled tamagoyaki, sweet omelet that tastes like breakfast and childhood all at once. And, of course, green tea whisked to a froth if you're trying to show off, poured clean and still if you're keeping it humble. You wipe the edges of each dish. Balance the tray. Take a deep breath. Here comes the quirky tidbit. In some households, hosts would subtly observe which foods guests touched first. Supposedly, it revealed their true personalities. Pickles first, too bold. Rice first, respectful. Fermented soybeans first, psychopath. Okay, maybe not officially, but it tracks. You kneel, present the tray, bowing just deeply enough to show deference without surrender. The guest, a thin man with the voice of a rustling scroll, accepts with murmured thanks. He examines the spread, takes a deliberate bite of the tamagoyaki. You mentally check the safe box. Sweet egg equals diplomacy. You remain seated nearby, as custom dictates, sipping your own tea and pretending to find the conversation riveting. He's discussing agricultural quotas. You're imagining your cousin using a pickled plum as a projectile again. Historians still argue whether samurai meals were more form than function. The guest muses suddenly, as if he's quoting your narration directly. But I say, a morning meal, prepared with grace, is the finest form of diplomacy. You nod like this is wisdom, because it kind of is. Eventually, he finishes. There's a lull. Then, the moment you've been waiting for, he mentions an open posting in the northern mountains. A shrine needs a steward. Quiet, remote, high elevation, excellent mushrooms. You express interest. Modestly, of course. No one likes a career-hungry samurai. He says he'll consider it. You bow him out with the rest of the family, standing beneath the paper lanterns while cicadas drone like sleepy alarm clocks in the trees. Your cousin mutters something about how he should have been the one offered a shrine. You suggest he start by not misplacing pickled plums. Back in your room, you stretch your legs, listening to the house settle. There's something comforting about the way wooden joints creak at night, like old bones sighing. You lie down, arms folded over your stomach, gaze fixed on the rafters above. Earlier that day feels 100 years away, but you still taste a whisper of that grilled fish. You still hear your uncle's voice, low and expectant. You still remember the weight of the ink brush as your poem took shape. And the tray, that perfect tray of food. Balanced, ordered, quietly noble. Samurai breakfast wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual. A portrait of discipline plated between rice and pickles. And now, even in the dark, with your eyes growing heavy, you can almost smell it again. The tang of fermented beans, the sweetness of egg, the ghost of steam lifting from miso. Maybe that's what honor smells like. Or maybe you're just hungry again. Either way, the day is far from over. You have another one waiting for you. And if luck holds, it might start somewhere a little higher, a little colder, a little more mushroom-flavored. But for now, sleep. The crows call first. Sharp, urgent, and unapologetically loud. You stir beneath your thin cotton quilt, one eye cracked open, silently resenting every feathered being in existence. The sky is still more blue-gray than morning, but here you are, awake again before sunrise. You rise without ceremony, bones creaking in soft protest. The floor is cool underfoot, the tatami smelling faintly of dust and rice straw. There's a rhythm now, isn't there? A pattern to this life. Not just honor and ritual, but also the quiet repetition that makes up most of your days. You head for the veranda, yawning into your sleeve, and sip the water left in your bamboo cup. It's flat and tepid, but there's something sacred about this tiny act. In the Edo period, many samurai followed a strict morning purification routine, including rinsing the mouth, washing the face and hands, and sometimes whispering a few choice prayers, especially if they had enemies or a hangover. Today, you opt for a quick splash of water and an equally quick prayer. Please let breakfast not be pickled radish again. You shuffle toward the kitchen, but the scent that greets you stops you in your tracks. Is that? Yes. Grilled eggplant. You weren't expecting that. The kitchen is already buzzing. Your cousin is somehow awake and whistling, chopping greens like he's auditioning for a kabuki side gig. A pot bubbles quietly in the corner. The aroma is rich, miso again, but this time with barley and wild mushrooms. Earthy, comforting, like slurping up a forest path. A steaming bowl of white rice is passed to you with minimal ceremony. This, of course, is the backbone of every samurai meal. Not fancy, not optional. It's so central that stipends for samurai were often paid in koku, a unit based on how much rice could feed a person for a year. But today, the rice has a bonus. A sprinkle of toasted sesame and dried yuzu peel. Luxury. Maybe. But also a flex. Someone's been foraging. You sit on the kitchen step, cradling your tray. Next to the rice and soup is a delicate square of cold tofu topped with grated ginger and soy sauce. Simple, clean, the edible version of minimalist poetry. Here's a quirky tidbit for your morning digestion. Edo-period tofu was so popular, entire books were written about it. Recipes, philosophies, tofu-themed haiku. One particularly intense writer described it as the taste of moonlight caught in silk. You take a bite. Tastes mostly like bean curd, but sure, moonlight if you squint. Your cousin joins you, slurping loudly. You know, he says, mouth full. If you do end up at that shrine, you're going to have to learn to make this stuff yourself. No cooks in the mountains. You grunt. Not because he's wrong, but because the idea of tofu in winter with no firewood sounds like a punishment from a particularly passive-aggressive ghost. Still, there's a tiny flutter in your chest. A shrine in the mountains. Mist. Silence. A place to write in peace. Maybe raise a goat. Or several. Your uncle passes by behind you, already dressed. He nods. Approval. That's 2 syllables worth of emotion from him. You bask in it like a lizard in the sun. After breakfast, it's time to train. Yes, even on tofu mornings. The courtyard has been swept, and your practice partner is already waiting, bamboo shurnai in hand, hair tied back, and that look in their eyes like they've got something to prove. Again, the wood beneath your feet is cool and smooth as you step into position. You bow. They bow. and then steel thunderclaps against bamboo. Here's the historical beat. By the Edo period, real combat had become rare for most samurai. With peace under the Tokugawa shogunate, many bushi turned to formalized martial arts, kendo, aido, and kenjutsu, as both physical discipline and social display. Swordsmanship wasn't just about killing anymore. It was about precision, composure, and being able to win while still looking graceful. Your sparring match is mostly even, though you do get clocked in the ribs once. Nothing a strategically tied sash can't hide. As you wipe sweat from your brow, your mind drifts. Back to that tofu. Back to the taste of yuzu. Back to that little envelope of possibility. The shrine, the post, the quiet. Historians still argue whether samurai truly desired peace or simply adapted to it. Your training partner says between gulps of water, like this is perfectly normal post-spar banter. You shrug. Maybe they just wanted decent soup. They nod. Same. After training, you strip out of your damp underlayers and settle near the engawa with another cup of tea, roasted barley this time, dark and nutty. The breeze brings the scent of camellia blossoms, the rustle of pine needles. You think about the rhythms of breakfast, how every dish, every item on that tray tells a story about the land, the season, the family, the expectations pressed into your shoulders like an extra robe. Breakfast is no small thing. It's the opening move of your day, your defense against chaos, your anchor in the shifting current of politics, propriety, and unpredictable guests. You reach into your sleeve and pull out a folded scrap of paper. Another poem, maybe. This one's for yourself. You smooth it flat against the step and begin to write. Rice steam in morning. Sword hums. Tofu holds silence. Sky forgets to rush. You sit with it a moment, letting the ink dry. Not bad. You might even show your cousin, but not today. Today you hold the stillness. You sip your tea. You feel the day unfolding around you like warm rice paper, delicate and full of possibilities. And in that quiet, your story is still cooking. One bowl at a time. The rest of the household begins to stir, one sleepy step at a time. A child coughs down the hall. Someone drops a sandal with the force of a minor earthquake, and a door creaks like it's auditioning for a no play. The rhythm of the house builds gently, like a string instrument being tuned in slow motion. Breakfast has ended, but its warmth lingers on your tongue, in your stomach, and most importantly, in the subtle shift of your mood. You stretch your arms over your head, joints popping in protest. Time to get dressed properly, not just for house training or tea sipping, but for actual errands. You slip into your formal kimono, adjusting the collar just so, and wrap the obi around your waist with a little more flair than usual. Because today you're heading into town. Edo's streets pulse with the buzz of mid-morning. Sandaled feet slap against packed earth. Merchants shout their wares, and the distant clang of a bell marks time as well as intent. You move through the throng with practiced ease, one hand on the hilt of your daisho, not because you expect trouble, but because appearances matter. Even in peace, you make your way toward your favorite rice dealer first. Not because you're low on rice, you're not, but because he hears things. And as any Edo-period samurai with a little ambition knows, information is sometimes more nourishing than food. The dealer waves you in. His stall smells like warm grain and the faintest trace of soy smoke. Heard there's a new magistrate up in Asakusa, he mutters, handing you a wrapped parcel of polished short grain. Young, full of ideals. The kind that won't last. You raise an eyebrow. The kind that wants breakfast meetings? He snorts. The kind that eats imported red rice and thinks it makes him invincible. You tuck that bit away. Never know when breakfast habits will become blackmail material. You continue through the market, past fishmongers and lacquerware stalls, stopping briefly to admire a seller hawking persimmons arranged in such an artistic pyramid it could pass for sculpture. You grab two, because fruit counts as breakfast dessert, right? Here's your mainstream fact of the day. The Edo period saw the emergence of vibrant urban food cultures. While breakfast remained modest at home for most, city markets exploded with variety, fresh tofu, grilled eel, mochi, and even morning soba for those on the go. Think of it like Edo's version of food trucks, minus the exhaust fumes and questionable licensing. You pass a stall selling warm rice cakes filled with sweet azuki bean paste. You buy one. For research. Naturally. Nearby, a ronin is trying to haggle over dried bonito flakes with the intensity of a man negotiating land treaties. He spots you, recognizes your family crest, and suddenly remembers he has somewhere else to be. You let him go. No sense starting your day with a duel over garnish. A little deeper into the city, you stop by a tea house, not one of the fancy ones, but a humble shop with sliding windows, red cushions, and an old woman who has definitely seen more sunrises than emperors. You sit, sip a thin roasted tea, and listen. The tea has that same quiet earthiness as the one from home, but with an extra note, almost burnt, in a good way. You ask what she used. She grins. Twigs. Roasted too long. You're welcome. You nod. Delicious accidents are still delicious. While you sip, you sketch in the corner of your notebook, just a few strokes. The arc of a roof tile, the curve of the tea ladle's handle, the lines of your rice parcel. You're not sure yet if it's a poem or a shopping list. Either way, it's yours. Here's a fringe tidbit to chew on. Some samurai, especially the lower-ranked ones, took on part-time jobs like tutoring, night watch, or even calligraphy commissions just to afford quality breakfast ingredients. One famously finicky swordsman allegedly walked miles to buy the correct pickled plum every week. Dedication or madness? Hard to say. Historians still argue whether the average samurai actually lived as well as the scrolls suggest. The tea lady says out of nowhere, as if reading your mind, "You lot had nice armor and terrible teeth." You almost choke on your twig tea. As the sun climbs, you head back through the winding alleys, your rice parcel under one arm, persimmons swinging in a woven net at your side. Children play with spinning tops near the shrine gates. Two women argue over the merits of cabbage, and a pair of monks chant softly near a well, asking more for attention than coin. Back at the estate, the heat of the day has settled in. You step inside, trading sandals for indoor slippers, and are greeted with the familiar sound of someone practicing the shamisen 2 rooms over. Badly. You pass the central garden, where your uncle is attempting to coax a pine into submission with careful wire and intense glares. He looks up, frowns, and gestures toward your persimmons. You sigh and hand him one. He bites into it like it owes him money. Upstairs, you change back into lighter robes. Tucking your market finds a way. The rice goes into the storehouse. The tea gets labeled. The persimmons, you keep one for yourself. You sit again on the veranda, the fruit in your hand, and take a long, thoughtful bite. It's juicy, firm, and unexpectedly sweet. And as you chew, you think about all the tiny rituals that orbit breakfast, the gathering of ingredients, the half-heard gossip, the flavor of roasted twigs, and the echo of a tea lady's laugh. Nothing extravagant, nothing world-shattering, but essential, because breakfast isn't just a meal. It's the warm-up act for a samurai's day. A quiet poem written in rice and steam. And you, oddly enough, are starting to feel full in more ways than one. The persimmon finishes with a delicate snap of skin between your teeth, and you let the taste linger. Sweetness like this reminds you that life, though sharpened by duty and ritual, still has its quiet indulgences. You set the seed on a small lacquer tray, already planning to dry it for a game of pitch seed with your nephew later. Because, let's face it, every samurai deserves a little mischief before lunch. Inside, the house hums with activity. The kitchen is already beginning its midday preparations. Water being fetched, pickles rotated, a hunk of daikon radish getting aggressively chopped. You wander back in, not to cook, but to observe. Breakfast is long past, but its shadows still dance in the corners. A smear of miso on a pot lid, the empty rack where grilled fish cooled earlier, the faint scent of barley lingering above the fire pit. Your aunt is kneeling on the floor, elbow deep in the rice drawer, muttering about weevils like they personally insulted her honor. You offer help and she waves you off. You just spill it. Again. Fair enough. As she sifts and sniffs and generally judges the quality of every grain like a jeweler, you help the youngest kitchen apprentice polish bowls. The kid's about 9, missing a front tooth, and has the chaotic energy of a squirrel on too much rice vinegar. He pauses, squinting at a lacquer bowl. Why don't we eat mochi for breakfast? You think for a moment. Because we'd fall asleep again before our swords were even sharpened. He snorts, then drops the bowl into the rinse tub with a splash big enough to qualify as a minor flood. Here's your mainstream fact. Breakfast in the Edo period was typically structured around seasonality and regional access. For samurai, that usually meant rice, pickles, grilled fish, and miso soup, but depending on proximity to the sea or trade hubs, ingredients could vary. It wasn't unusual for inland clans to have breakfasts more reliant on wild vegetables, fermented items, or chestnut porridge. You glance at the fire. Someone's roasting sesame seeds in a dry pan, and the toasty aroma wafts across the kitchen like an edible incense. You close your eyes and inhale. That scent? That's home. Then there's the quirky bit. A few samurai families, particularly those with artistic inclinations, believed in fortune-based breakfasts. Literally. One record describes a clan in Kyushu whose matriarch prepared each morning meal by drawing slips of paper with seasonal pairings from a lacquer box. Fish and umebashi? Fortunate. Yams and lotus root? Avoid leaving the house. Seaweed and pears? Expect a visitor. Was it effective? Who knows? But at least it made rice interesting. Historians still argue whether these culinary superstitions were widespread traditions or isolated oddities recorded by nosy neighbors. Your aunt says, without looking up from her rice sifting. You blink. Were you eavesdropping again? She just smirks. Later that morning, you find yourself back in the study room, kneeling at a low table scattered with half-inked calligraphy sheets. You've got brush in hand, elbow steady, and you're trying to finish copying a poem by Basho without blotting the paper. The poem, of course, is about breakfast. A quiet haiku written after a long trip on foot, where the poet describes the relief of warm broth at sunrise. You try to get the line about steamed fish curling like mist just right. Blot. You sigh. Someone walks past the doorway and mutters, maybe write about pickles. You seem to handle those better. You consider throwing your brush at them. Instead, you start over. Again. But there's something therapeutic in the repetition. Something deeply grounding about copying words that someone else took care to shape, words about the mundane, but in a way that makes the mundane seem sacred. You pause to pour yourself a small cup of tea. This one's a green sencha, bitter with a slight grassy finish. The sharp, less cozy than your roasted twig blend, but it wakes up your brain in all the right ways. If breakfast is the warm-up act, tea is the intermission jazz solo. Across the courtyard, a garden apprentice struggles to rake perfect lines in the gravel. He stops, sighs, then uses the end of the rake to draw a giant smiling face instead. You make a mental note to erase that before your uncle sees it. Just before noon, you head to the veranda again, your unofficial throne. A tray appears beside you like magic. Leftover grilled rice balls from breakfast, now crisped and golden from the fire. They're laced with soy sauce and wrapped in slightly charred sheets of nori. You take a bite. Crunch, salt, warmth. It's like breakfast reincarnated as a snack. Or maybe it's just a reminder that even leftovers can be a kind of blessing. You chew slowly, watching the clouds drift by. One looks suspiciously like a cat, another like a teapot. You let your thoughts unravel a bit, drifting toward nothing in particular. The apprentice pokes his head around the corner. Do samurai ever have to fight before breakfast? You nod. Sometimes. He grins. What if they're hungry? You raise your rice ball. Then they fight better. He gasps. Because they want the other guy's breakfast? Exactly. He disappears again, presumably to write a play about it. That's the thing about breakfast, you start the day nourished not just in the belly, but in the mind, in the little stories and rituals that give the day its shape. Whether it's a rice ball, a splash of miso, or a perfectly burnt twig tea, it's all part of the same quiet ceremony. The samurai life may seem strict, but within that structure, there's surprising room for flavor. And you, dear warrior, are beginning to realize that the day might just taste as good as it started. You're still savoring the last bites of your charred rice ball when a low gong sounds from deeper within the house. Once, then twice. That's the signal. Your father has emerged from his meditation chamber, and that means it's time for, Well, more stillness, technically, but a more social kind. You stand, brush crumbs off your hakama, and retie your sash. There's a ripple of awareness across the household. The samurai lord is awake. People straighten their spines, wipe their hands, clear their throats. Even the rooster out back seems to let out a more respectful crow. Your role now is subtle. You're not rushing to assist him directly. You're simply present. A shadow, a witness. Someone to refill the tea without being asked. Someone to nod in the right places during his stories about sword masters and ill-fated river crossings. Think. Supporting actor with very few lines but excellent posture. You enter the tatami room and kneel at the threshold until acknowledged. Your father, dressed in a fresh indigo kimono, sits before a small brazier, heating water in an iron kettle shaped like a gourd. The steam rises in slow, twisting ribbons. "Sancha," he says simply, and you nod. You already knew, of course, but tradition demands the request be spoken aloud, even if it's the same every single day. You begin the tea ritual. Lift the scoop, measure the leaves, warm the bowl, pour the water. It's not the formalized matcha ceremony with all its whiskings and choreographed gestures, but there's still elegance in the simplicity.
No rush. No chatter.
Just two warriors and a quietly reverent beverage. Mainstream fact time. By the Edo period, tea drinking was deeply ingrained in samurai life. Sancha, loose-leaf green tea, was especially favored for everyday consumption. It wasn't as codified as the ceremonial powdered matcha, but it still carried a certain philosophical weight. Samurai weren't just drinking tea. They were embodying values of patience, clarity, and restraint. You pass him the cup, bowed. He sips, nods. "Bitter," he says. "Like duty," you reply. He chuckles softly. "Victory." Then he gestures for you to sit. Conversation, if it happens, will unfold in glacial increments. A word here, a silence there. You discuss the rice harvest, the performance of a new recruit, the curious behavior of the temple cat, who's apparently taken to stealing sandals. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Edo households trained cats, not dogs, as semi-official breakfast alarm clocks. The cats were taught, through persistent bribery, to meow outside certain rooms at sunrise, ensuring the household began its duties promptly. One historical scroll even suggests a particular daimyo paid his cat in tiny salted sardines each morning. An arrangement historians are still debating, because honestly, who trained who? You pour a second round of tea. The conversation dips into memory. Your father recounts a misadventure from his youth, involving a stolen daikon, a rigged breakfast wager, and an angry shrine keeper. He smiles for exactly 1.5 seconds. You mentally note it as an event of national importance. Historians still argue whether young samurai were allowed as much mischief as the stories suggest. He says dryly, as if he's part of the historical debate himself. You're about to reply when the house's youngest servant bolts in and whispers something at your father's ear. He listens, sighs, and waves a hand. "A guest is coming," he says. "Go help the kitchen." So you do. Back in the kitchen, it's a flurry of knife work and fire. The guest is apparently a traveling scholar, known for always arriving right after breakfast but expecting a small feast anyway. You're handed a tray and instructed to prepare a second breakfast of sorts. Your aunt gives you a look like, "Don't embarrass us." You load the tray with tamagoyaki, rolled omelet, slightly sweetened and golden like sunlit silk, alongside a mound of grated daikon, lightly salted, a sliver of grilled mackerel, pickled plums. Rice, of course, because not offering rice in Japan is practically an act of war. And to drink, a cloudy barley tea, chilled slightly in a clay jug. You walk slowly, knees locked in that half-glide shuffle. You set the tray down without a sound. The scholar bows deeply. He's dressed in scholarly gray, scrolls poking out of his sash like bamboo shoots. His hair is slightly wild, and you suspect he's one of those, "I write better when I haven't slept" types. He takes one bite of tamagoyaki and begins reciting a poem on the spot. You pretend not to be impressed, but internally you're filing that line about egg like golden dawn wrapped in silence for future use. After the meal, He insists on thanking the young culinary artisan personally. Your aunt throws you into the hallway before that happens, probably for your own protection. Back in your room, you sit at your writing board, suddenly inspired. You begin to sketch a story about a cat who rings a temple bell to signal breakfast, a rice ball with magical powers, and a samurai who must duel his own hunger. It's ridiculous. It's charming. It's yours. You finish the first page and add a little seal in red ink at the corner. A stylized egg, maybe, maybe not. It doesn't matter. What matters is how the morning lingers, how the ritual of breakfast, repeated and reshaped, becomes the rhythm that holds your life together. And tomorrow you'll do it all again. Maybe with pickled burdock, maybe with grilled tofu, but definitely with that same old cat scratching at the door just before sunrise. Because in this house, and in this time, breakfast isn't just a meal. It's a legacy. You wake to the sound of light rain tapping the roof tiles like a distant bamboo flute. Outside, the garden pines shimmer with droplets. The air smells of damp earth and early morning. Exactly the kind of weather that makes you appreciate a hot breakfast even more. You stretch beneath your thin futon and let your body sink into the quiet luxury of just 5 more breaths. But only 5. A samurai, even a sleepy one, must not oversleep. Today's a little different. You'll be cooking breakfast solo, for the first time. No aunts hovering, no cousins peeking. Just you, your skills, and a stack of expectations taller than the pickled radish jar. You tie your headband with unnecessary determination and head toward the kitchen. The floor is cold. The brazier is barely glowing. The rain hasn't stopped. Perfect. You kneel at the hearth and begin building the fire from scratch. The kindling's damp from the humidity, so it takes some coaxing. You blow gently into the base, coaxing flame from smoke like some wizard in training. And finally, there it is. A shy, flickering tongue of orange. You've got this. You decide on a simple but respectable menu. Miso soup, rice, and a few side dishes with enough flair to earn family approval without inviting mockery. First, the soup. You ladle water into the iron pot and add kombu, dried kelp. As it simmers, you prep the miso paste and slice up tofu and green onion. It's not fancy, but the smell is like a warm hug from a very polite ghost. The rice is already soaking. You drain it, level it in the clay pot, and start it steaming. That gives you just enough time to assemble a small plate of pickled eggplant and daikon, purple and white like a checkerboard. You lightly fry some lotus root slices in sesame oil, and oh, because it's raining, you toss in a grilled salted sardine for comfort. Mainstream historical fact. In Edo-period households, breakfast was almost always warm and involved miso soup, rice, and pickles. Protein might come from fish or tofu, and seasonal vegetables were always welcome. It wasn't a luxurious spread, but it was precise, balanced, and nourishing. A samurai needed focus, and that started with not being hungry. You arrange everything on a lacquer tray. Each bowl faces the proper direction. Chopsticks are aligned. The sardine's eye is even turned respectfully to the left because, well, apparently fish etiquette is a thing. Quirky tidbit time. Some households during the Edo period believed that the first person to eat a fish's eyeball would gain extra wisdom that day. You have absolutely no intention of testing that theory, but you do make sure to point the eye at your older cousin's spot at the table, just in case. You carry the tray slowly to the central room, where the family waits in various states of alertness. Your uncle stifles a yawn so wide it could swallow a lantern. Your aunt eyes the pickled daikon like it's plotting against her. The scholar guest from yesterday, still here, still writing, still sipping his barley tea with one pinky raised like a sleepy aristocrat. You set the tray down. Bow. Step back. Silence. Your father picks up his bowl. Tastes the soup. Chews slowly. Then, this miso is strong. You nod. Like a warrior's will. He snorts. Your mother raises a brow. The rice isn't burnt. You beam. Yet. Your uncle points at the fish's eyeball. Why's it facing me? You offer no explanation. Everyone eats. There's a certain rhythm to it now. The clink of chopsticks, the hiss of tea being poured. Rain against the shoji screens. You sip your soup and feel awake. Like this meal you made is a kind of armor. Not flashy, but solid. Historians still argue whether samurai families really maintained this level of morning decorum every single day. Some diaries suggest rigid rituals. Others imply a lot more casual slurping and complaining than we picture. Either way, breakfast wasn't just sustenance. It was symbolic. The calm before the storm. The warmth before the sword. After the meal, your mother hands you a small folded cloth. Inside, a rice ball wrapped in pickled leaf, packed for a mid-morning snack. It's lumpy, slightly crooked, clearly made just for you. You tuck it into your sleeve and bow again. The rain has slowed to a mist now, and the streets outside glisten like lacquerware. You grab your umbrella, a bamboo and paper one painted with red chrysanthemums, and step out, ready for errands, or sword training, or delivering a package to the temple monk who always smells suspiciously like fermented plum wine. As you walk, that warm rice ball presses against your ribs. Not enough to bruise, but enough to remind you, breakfast happened. You made it. You fed the clan. You didn't burn the fish badly. And in this world of order and obedience and perfectly folded futons, that's a win. You pass two children playing in the gutter, flicking pebbles at each other and shouting about ninja rules. A woman sweeps her stoop and nods politely. A vendor sells fried tofu sticks from a little pushcart, the smell already tugging at your hunger despite everything you just ate. But you keep walking, because the day is beginning, and you're starting it the same way your ancestors did, warm, full, alert, and ready to make sure nobody else steals the fish eyeball of destiny. The morning has unfolded like a slow scroll painting itself across your mind, but now the sun begins to dip lower, and you find yourself back at the household threshold. The day's rhythm softens as you return from errands and training, your footsteps muffled by the woven straw sandals that are finally starting to feel broken in. Your fingers still faintly smell of charcoal and grilled fish, the lingering scents wrapping you like an invisible cloak. Inside, the house breathes a familiar warmth. The faint aroma of tea leaves and pickled plums greets you before the lantern light catches your eyes. You pause a moment, appreciating how this space, this small fortress of wood and paper, holds not just your family but the memories folded within every sliding door and creaking floorboard. The samurai life isn't only about duels and honor. It's about these quiet hours, the ones that knit the soul together. Your mother is there by the hearth, carefully arranging a small tray for the evening meal, her kimono's indigo fabric soft in the lantern light. She hums a tune you can't quite place, a melody as old as the mountains outside. You set down your things and bow deeply, the day's tension flowing out of you with the gesture. She smiles gently. You've done well today. You smile back, feeling the familiar pride and exhaustion blend. In this moment, the samurai's armor isn't forged of steel but of the simple, shared acts of care and ritual. You sit, letting the day's lessons and successes sink in, as a bowl of warm rice and simmered vegetables arrives. The familiar taste is like a soft whisper of home, a reminder that beneath the lacquered armor and the expectations lies a human heart, beating steadily in time with the rhythm of life. Historians still debate how much daily life for a samurai family revolved around ritual versus practicality, whether these breakfasts and meals were always as deliberate or often as rushed and improvised as any households might be. But what endures is the feeling that each morning and evening meal was an anchor in a life that could often feel as fragile as the paper walls that surround you. As the lanterns flicker and the rain outside turns to mist, you close your eyes briefly. The house smells of rice, tea, and cedar wood, a scent that, for now, means safety, belonging, and a small measure of peace. So you breathe in deeply, holding the taste of the day close, and prepare to let sleep carry you away, knowing that tomorrow you'll rise and do it all again. Maybe with a little more confidence, maybe with a little more fisheye wisdom. Now, let your breath slow, even slower, and let the quiet of the night fold around you like the softest kimono. The evening deepens around you like a soft, unfolding scroll, each quiet moment drawing you gently toward rest. The day's noises, footsteps on wooden floors, the clink of bowls, the low murmur of voices, fade into a calm hush, wrapping the house in a tender embrace. You feel the warmth lingering from the hearth, the the faint scent of tea and cedar whispering stories of home, comfort, and simple rituals carried through generations. Your body sinks deeper into stillness, the weight of armor replaced by the ease of familiar blankets and soft tatami mats beneath you. The steady rhythm of your breath matches the slow, steady dance of lantern flames flickering nearby. Outside, the night wind hums softly through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain-damp earth and distant blossoms, nature's own lullaby. In these gentle hours, the sharp edges of the samurai's day soften, revealing the quiet heart beneath the warrior's life, a heart that finds peace in shared meals, in the scent of simmering rice, in the soft rustle of silk sliding across polished wood. You carry with you the knowledge that these small moments, repeated day after day, stitch together the fabric of belonging and purpose. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across a calm sky, easy and unhurried. There is no need to grasp or chase. Simply rest in the warmth of these memories and the slow unfolding of night. Your dreams will come fragrant with the sense of home, stories told in silence, and the gentle promise of dawn. So, breathe deeply, softly, and let yourself drift into sleep, a peaceful sleep wrapped in the timeless rhythms of a samurai's morning and evening, held safe beneath the watchful gaze of stars.